All right, welcome to chapter 3 on human development. This chapter and course will actually be hopefully a lot shorter than the previous one. It should only take about 30 to 40 minutes. So let's go ahead and begin. Think about a few things. Who do you look like? Your mom, your dad, uncle, grandparents? What are the influence of genetics on your looks? What about your personality? Do you see that you're similar in your personality, more like certain people in your family? Think about if you have siblings, are you like your sibling? Are you completely different than your sibling or your parents? I know that if you're younger, a lot of times you hope that you're different than your parents, but as you age and get older, you realize you're a lot more like them that you would like to be. But do you agree that we're shaped, our personality, our attributes, what we look like, is it shaped more by nature, and that's our environment, or by our nature, or by how we were born, or nurture, which is more our environment, our upbringing, or both? And why do you believe that? How do you account for your siblings if you have siblings that are totally different than you, different personalities, but yet they're raised in the same household? How can that be? After reading chapter 3 and also listening to this video, you're going to be able to answer those questions and more. You're going to look at and explain how genes impact human development, how our environment affects us or impacts our human development, epigenetic factors, and also describe key aspects of physical development across the lifespan as we age and progress. There are certain things and certain triggers and experiences we have that affect our personality and who we are. And we'll be able to explain key aspects of perceptual development across the lifespan. And of course, there are many other things we're going to talk about, the socio-social dilemmas by Erikson and different theorists and psychologists and researchers that really try to explain and break down the not just genetic, but also the environmental influences on our own personality and who we are. So we go through, there's Piaget and Vygotsky, we'll talk about that. And hopefully help you start to create a plan and manage a challenge to your own values. And with this comes, when we're talking about the makeup of who we are, and we come to realize that we can change who we are, we can change who we're going to become based on these influences and how our perception, how we view the world. That's really going to hopefully help us have a better self-awareness of who we are, but also awareness of who we can be. And that's going to be hopefully expressed in the final project at the end of class whenever you write your personal change plan. So I want you to start thinking about that now, but what would you like to write about? What are things, how would you like to be better? Or maybe things have impacted you negatively early on during life and you would like to overcome those things. So what you're going to have the ability to do in that final project or that research paper is to look at scholarly research to find out and about how these things, these experiences that you may have had, have maybe negatively or maybe positively impacted your life. But usually people select something that's been kind of a negative thing that's happened. And when you look at the research and you understand it better, then you can help overcome that so you can really become all you can be, to be the best version of yourself. And you're going to write about that in attempt not just to help yourself, but maybe help others that are experienced or have experienced similar traumas or difficulties in life. And that's more of your change plan, your personal change plan. So let's watch a quick video.
Welcome, esteemed learners, to another fascinating exploration of psychology with your Professor Geoffrey Hastings. Today we will summarize Chapter 3, Human Development in your text, Introduction to Psychology, Gateways to Mind and Behavior, Dennis Kuhn, John Mitterer and Tanya Martini, published by Kingage Publishing. This chapter introduces us to a captivation field known as developmental psychology. It's a field that casts a wide net, capturing the expanse of human life from the earliest moments of conception to the finality of death. A journey, if you will, from womb to tomb. In this vast and varied field, we explore the myriad stages of development, each with its own unique characteristics and milestones. These stages, which we'll be illustrating in more detail, provide insight into the fascinating transformation we all undergo as part of the human experience. As we journey through this chapter together, we'll uncover the intriguing interplay of genes and environment in shaping our lives. From the blueprint of our DNA to the world around us, each plays a crucial role in our development. Stay tuned as we unravel how our genes and our environment play a role in shaping who we are. Genes, the building blocks of life. They hold the blueprint of our being and play a pivotal role in our development. These master architects, residing in every cell of our bodies, orchestrate the symphony of our growth from a single cell to a complex organism. The genetic information we inherit from our parents not only determines our physical traits, the color of our eyes, the shape of our nose, the texture of our hair, but also subtly influences our behavior and intelligence. For instance, genes can predispose us to certain personality traits such as extroversion or introversion. They can also impact our cognitive abilities, potentially setting the stage for our intellectual pursuits. But it's crucial to remember that these genes are not dictators, but rather contributors in the complex process of human development. For genes are only a part of the story. Our environment also has a hand in molding us. While our genes lay the foundation, our environment constructs our personalities, attitudes, and behavior. The environment we grow up in, whether it's the family we're born into, the culture we're immersed in, or the social class we belong to, all have profound impacts on our development. They shape how we see the world, how we interact with others, and ultimately who we become. Now, let's introduce a fascinating concept called epigenetics. It's like the meeting point of our genome and our environment. You see, while our DNA sequence remains the same throughout our lives, our environment can actually alter the way our genes function without changing our genetic code. This can affect our physical and mental health, our behaviors, and even how we respond to certain situations. So our development is an intricate dance between our genes and our environment, a journey that we'll continue to explore in our next chapter. We've journeyed through the fascinating world of human development today. We've uncovered how genes, environment, and epigenetics shape our journey from womb to tomb. If you would like to learn more or to enroll in one of our virtual or in-person classes, please visit lonestar.edu. Thank you for joining in today's intellectual journey. Don't forget to subscribe for more enlightening discussions and extended content. Next up, we venture into the realm of sensation, attention and perception in Chapter 4. Thank you for watching. Until then, keep the curiosity alive.
So let's look at the forces that shape our genetics and nature. We're going to start off with nature. So heredity is, it's what people get. You inherit your chromosomes that contain their genes, our genes from our parents. And chromosomes come in pairs. Humans have 46 chromosomes, which are 23 pairs. And children randomly get, each pair of chromosomes from either your mother or your father. And a genome, though, is a complete set of DNA. So it's your genetic material in an organism. So that is the genome. It contains all the information needed for a person to develop and grow, and basically outlines just your genetic makeup. So DNA, which is deoxyribonucleic acid, it unlocks many of the mysteries of how living beings, how we make, we replicate, or repair themselves. And the DNA is found in every cell of an organism to build, maintain, repair itself. So by replicating and passing on DNA to animals, to plants, to microorganisms, it can impact your characteristics and your children. So it's critical, to the Darwinian. If you look at Darwinian theory of survival and evolution, it basically says only the strong survive by passing on your traits through your DNA. So your strongest traits are what's going to be inherited by your offspring, and then so on. So, when you think of what is DNA in humans, half of the DNA in our cells stems from our mother, while half from our father. This is the way that we inherit a mixture of characteristics from both of our parents. So it's, they're long and complex code. that makes everyone unique. So it's our genetic code tells us about the details of our ancestry and potential health problems that we may have. Well, genes are sections of our DNA, so part of our DNA sequence that contains the code for specific proteins, normally linked to a specific function or physical characteristic of our genetic makeup, like OCA2, that is a strong influence on our eye color, for instance. That's one of the genes or the strands that influence our genetic makeup. Variations in these parts of our DNA lead to different characteristics we see among people. There's also a common misconception about genes that a gene is responsible for a trait, which is it's actually highly unusual. It usually does not. Most commonly, the physical traits result in a combination of many genes. So you can't just find one gene and say that that is responsible for one trait. And also you think of how does it replicate itself? And there's a double helix structure that is a simple way the DNA molecule replicates itself, and it's the help of other chemicals in the cell. The double helix untwists, and the two split down the middle like a zipper, if you can think about a zipper. And like A always pairs with T, C with G. But what happens when that replication process of the DNA, when it's splitting and replicating, if that code is copied incorrectly, that's going to cause the abnormality. So that's where you look at cancerous tumors and other kind of things can start in that person's DNA and their genetic makeup, where that's just how that actually happens, how those disorders happen. So dominant, we look at the different genes. We hear about dominant recessive genes. Dominant just says it refers to like a relationship between two versions of a gene. So individuals, like you receive two versions of each gene. It's actually an allele from each parent. So if these alleles of one are different, one is going to be expressed as the dominant gene is going to be expressed. And the other one that's not expressed is called a recessive gene. It's masked. So that recessive gene is, as you're inheriting two versions, that's the one that is not going to be present in that person. It doesn't mean it's gone. It just means it may not be present in that one person, but it's still there in the genetic code and can actually replicate itself with your children or that person's offspring. And then there's polygenetic inheritance. It's poly just meaning many, and genic is actually just referred to as a gene, but it refers to inherited patterns that are controlled by more than one gene, by many genes. And because multiple genes control that trait or that character that is being observed, it's common to see a range of differences in that trait. So it's just a polygenetic inheritance. So in prenatal development, we like to look at, of course, what type of these genes are influenced by prenatal development. So when you're in your mother's womb, what kind of things can influence the genetic makeup of that baby, of the unborn baby. And there's teratogen. It's a harmful substance that causes birth defects. Cigarette smoking can cause miscarriage, premature low birth weight. Congenital problems originate usually during prenatal development, when you're in your mother's womb and you're developing as an infant or prenatal. But one of the most important things to recognize too, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, FASD, occurs in children whose mother consume alcohol during pregnancy. And of course, babies can also be born, we see it with different addictions to drugs whenever the mother is taking drugs while being pregnant. And in the US, this is a quiz question. The greatest risk factors to unborn babies are actually alcohol and drug use, something to know about. Postnatal environment, there are what's called sensitivity or sensitive periods that are in every aspect of the environment that force the child into activity. Ideally, they all work in an environment. And through this work, they accomplish permanent acquisition of a characteristic. So after postnatal, when you're born, there's a period of time where your body is very susceptible to the environment. And there are certain things that can alter your development and become part of your genetic code. So there's, there are 5 sensitivity periods that are in categories. They categorize them in language, order, sensory skills, motor skills, and social skills. And when you're looking at that, think of it this way: after you're born, there can be environmental enrichment and or deprivation that you see there on the slide. Enrichment can stimulate your brain function through physical and social surroundings in those relationships. So it's a complex inanimate social stimulation that facilitate your sensory, your perception, the cognitive, motor, and social stimulation. And that means that if you feel loved, you have these certain things that you're going to develop in a different way than someone that may be deprived of this social interaction. And there's a broad perspective of deprivation in children. It consists of things such as, from the far spectrum, physical abuse, but also, even more important, emotional neglect as a baby. They have profound, psychological effects like separation anxiety, or if there's divorce in a household during this time of your life, if you're in foster or institutional care, or there's death of someone, that really can be it's considered childhood deprivation that can really alter that person's life and the genetic, believe it or not, that the well-being of that child. And early childhood deprivation associated with higher rates of neurodevelopmental and mental disorders in adulthood. So that impact on the brain and the structural changes underpin the effects are really not known. But what they do call it is epigenetics. This is how genes are affected and can change in the environment, where that you have your nature and nurture kind of meet, that can change your genetic code. So in epigenetics is a study of how behaviors and our environment can influence or cause changes that affect the way the genes work in your body, so that the genetic makeup, that code, can actually change. And it's the epigenetics is the study of that change, and it could be reversible, and they don't change our DNA sequence. So not necessarily the sequence, but they change how our body reads the DNA. I know that's kind of complex to understand, and it's, so that DNA, and you have all the information from life function, of a cell and their molecules. In that, the individual molecules of the DNA are actually the nucleotides, and that you see there, I think, on the screen there. And that's just something to understand. What epigenetics is, the study of that, how the environment affects our DNA, about how they interact. So concerning the role, just to test your knowledge of nature and nurture, why do those with the same biological parents who live in the same household, and even twins, you look at twin studies, do they have different physical features and personalities? Why do identical twins have different personalities? And what's more important, you think, by now, nature or nurture? So epigenetics and epigenome helps explain why identical twins that may grow up in, that are identical, their biology, all of the code is identical. They look the same. They're very much the same. But as they grow, even in the same household, they may, unless they're together every single minute of every day, the way they grow up is not going to be identical. And that's where a lot of this research can kind of test that to see how the environment affects our genetic makeup, or how our genetic makeup is impacted in our environment. So that is really where the study comes down to. So we look at it, we understand that both nature and nurture are important, and our body, it reflects a continuous interaction with the environment. So when we have this continuous interaction of all of our experiences and how we interpret those experiences, that actually is referred to as maturation, or maturity, or maturation of our body or our makeup. And over time, that genetic instruction, environmental conditions influence our body, our size, shape, height, intelligence, athletic potential, personality traits, sexual orientation, host of other human characteristics, all that can be impacted by the environment. So it's just something to kind of consider as we go through all of this. So physical and perceptual development. Changes continue over the lifespan, of course. And when you look at these different things, looking at these adaptive reflexes, at birth, you see babies. If you're around a baby, you see them grasping, rooting, sucking, and there's something called a moral reflex. And that moral reflex, it's normal reflex that babies are born with. It's if you've ever seen a baby and you kind of move them a little bit and they get, they think they're going to fall. It's like this startle. They feel like they're falling. That's a natural reflex that all babies universally are born with. Actually, if they test a baby and they actually don't have that reflex, then they know that there could be an injury or disease with that baby, because that is normal within and universally all over the world. So, and other reflexes like sucking, grabbing, help us establish like gratifying interaction between parents and infants, all that kind of stuff. They're that happen over the lifespan, and they're universal across all different populations in the world. And the rate of maturation, of maturity, it's the process that occurs as we grow and we change. And there are different types of maturation, including physical and cognitive maturation. So the way that we think about things, but also the way our body develops as we grow and we get older, has a different process. And that cognitive maturation is a process of development in the way we think as we grow. So the physical development, adolescence and adulthood, of course, you're familiar with, puberty and the different changes that our body goes through in puberty. And puberty is not the same as adolescence, even though they're similar time period. They're not the same. So there is a distinct definition between the two, or and the similar is the period of transition makes them actually different. And and here's something, we'll get more into this in chapter 11. We get into sex, gender, and sexuality. But during early development, the gonads of the fetus remain undifferentiated. So in other words, they're the same, and we're all basically, female until about 6-7 weeks of gestation. The expression of a gene, so the introduction of a Y chromosome for a male fetus, that's when the ovaries drop, become testes, and the body starts changing and from female to a male body, a baby. And also, and just realize too, that even though, there are those changes in our appearance and different changes between male and female, there are more similarities than there are, of course, differences in a male and female human. And, but also there are differences. But when we look at the brain between male and female people, the male brain is larger, but it doesn't mean smarter, actually, contrary in some ways. But males have a larger inferior parietal lobe, and that lobe is actually responsible for processing sensory input. So touch, that's why maybe more men are more physical touch. The pressure, heat, cold, also pain, feel more pain. That's why a lot of, I think, females aren't as big of babies as what a lot of males are whenever they're in pain, but they feel it more. They have that larger part. But I want you to think about that, since there are the differences, and considering the differences, and we're talking about physical development, also personality, the psychology behind this development in adolescence and early adulthood. What happens if someone's born with a more female brain but a male body? This is a very important thing as we get into this to really think about. Or what if some people are born with both male and female genitalia? Believe it or not, and you may not be aware of this, but almost 2%, it's 1.7% of the world's population, are born with both male and female genitalia. So, and a lot of people may not realize, even here in the United States, the government's identified 3 different sexes: male, female, and intersex. Intersex is born with both. And so I want you to think about your own culture, your religion, how it affects gender identity and your view of gender identity. because our culture provides a context of gender roles and our identity and the stereotypes that unfold as, we talk about sexual behavior and identification. And also our culture affects the variation in this gender related behaviors with individuals with, our cultural group, as well as variation between different cultures may think that a boy does this, a girl does this. But it's very important to understand that as our youth is transcending and transitioning from puberty, adolescence, and when their gender doesn't match, the gender at birth doesn't match how they feel, then that is when, you call it gender dysphoria, but when it occurs, and it happens to more people than you would believe, and hopefully more and more as there's more communication and talk about it, that it's identified more. And people are born this way and yet still treated like not just different, but wrong. And that's the part I want you to think about a little bit, because it creates significant distress and anxiety, and people don't feel comfortable in the body that they're born with. And people with that gender dysphoria, they may want to change the way that they express their gender. And the main thing, whatever your religious views are, all I'm asking you to do is to have an open mind as you are learning about these things, and really think about this, about the way people are treated and viewed, just so, you don't just like, this is the way it is, this is what my religion tells me, or this is what, the church or whatever. To really, as we're realizing more and more of the biology and the environment and all these things that interplay with ourselves, that we have to have an open mind is all I'm asking you to do at this point. And we'll talk more about that in chapter 11 as we get into it. But very interesting, but extremely important topic that we need to cover. Perceptual development. It refers to how we start interpreting and understanding the world around us, all the sensory input. And our perception allows, as children, to adapt, interact with our environment through the use of our senses, or, what we smell, hear, taste, whatever, what we feel. And all children are born with the ability to see, hear, smell, taste, touch. And infants and toddlers use that perception during interactions for, exploration, and to make sense of their surroundings, and even to make predictions about, if I do this, then this is going to happen. If I cry, this is going to happen. If I, whatever, they are already starting to learn the environment and how the environment interacts with people around them. And there are 5 stages you see on the screen there of perception. There's the stimulation, there's organization of that, the interpretation, the memory of it, and recall of these experiences. And that starts to form our perception of the world, our surroundings, and how we see that environment. So just a quick knowledge check. Of course, I talked about puberty and adolescence. A lot of people use that interchangeably, but they're not. Which of the following best describes adolescence? Do you remember what I said there? What describes adolescence? And that's going to be the period of transition, because adolescence is a period of psychological, social development and changes. It's generally around 10 to 19 years of age, where puberty is the physical transition achieved during teenage years. It's usually about 11 years of age for females, 12 years for males that have that puberty. So, and that's a physical transition. It's not just the psychological or social like adolescence. So what are the primary differences between a genome and a phenome? The genome is the encoded genetic of a trait, and the phenome is the physical expression of that trait. Phenomenon. It's the expression of how that trait was encoded. Under what conditions will a dominant gene be displayed? When a dominant gene controls a feature, the feature will appear every time the gene is present. May sound kind of funky. I could make it sound better, but this just matches along with the quiz. What's an example of an environmental influence during prenatal stage? If the mother experiences excess stress during pregnancy, her baby may be smaller at birth. That's one thing you learn in the book that we didn't talk about here, but that's one thing. When you go through the book and you start reading the environmental influences during prenatal periods, there are a lot of things that happens if they smoke, the low birth weight, things like that. If there are drugs, if there's stress, abuse, All these different things are really discussed, and they did a great job in the book. I encourage you to continue to read that. There will be additional questions on that. So we look at Unit 3, emotional and social development. So by 6 months of age, infants can express at least 6 basic emotions: happiness, sadness, fear, anger, surprise, and even disgust. By 6 months of age, they are already expressing these emotions with their face and what they do. And in adolescence and adulthood, there are a lot of factors that increase the risk of developing or triggering, certain things. The very first thing is some evidence emotions are related to anxiety and depression are becoming more common among adolescents. So we're looking at teenage years. Having issues that negatively affect like self-esteem, such as like overweight, peer problems, long-term bullying, or academic problems, having been the victim or witnessing violence or physical sexual abuse, these kind of things definitely increase the risk of developing depression, sadness and depression, and especially in teen years. And according to like the National Institute of Health, and this was in 2019, believe it or not, nearly 1 in 3 adolescents from age 13 to 18 are going to experience some type of high anxiety, and they call it a disorder. It's temporary, but they will have that experience. So it's becoming more common than rare to experience something like that. And mainly a big part of that is social media bullying. A lot of boys tend to bully, physical bullying, where females or girls tend to bully through social media and other things of what they say that are just as harmful, if not more. The strongest risk factors for depression in adolescence, or if there's a family history of depression, exposure to psychosocial stress, or inherited risks from developmental factors, prenatal birth, sex hormones, psychosocial adversity interaction also increase the risk through hormonal factors. So why do adolescents struggle with this? Well, you probably know, but the physical changes in teenage years can be a source of discomfort, especially for kids who develop early or late. Stress and overthinking is very, very common. Just overthinking everything. They are very common causes of anxiety in teens. And these worries often become the center around, school, social life, or body image. And that's one thing I hope that we discuss as we go throughout this course, or really becoming more aware of it and being able to interpret it in a different way without medication. Too often, I think doctors want to prescribe medication for these things, and they're basically just treating that symptom, but they're not treating the root cause. If you understand what that root cause is and you can become more self-aware of it, you don't need the medication. You just need to understand it, and then you will start to deal with it or interact differently. And also realize that these are temporary things, these discomforts, these feelings that a lot of adolescents have are very temporary, and they do go away. They're not permanent. Bullying, the thing, once you realize that bullying, for instance, makes you stronger, that you see it from a different light, you see how you can use that as a strength, then, it becomes a positive thing and it's not so negative. But another thing just to realize that children and adolescents, that report that I mentioned in 2019, it actually showed that children and adolescents that spend 3 hours or more on social media, gaming, have 2 times more likely the risk of mental health problems, including symptoms of depression and anxiety. Just realize that and control that. Now that you know it, you just need to check yourself and do something about that. That's not a bad paper. If you feel like that you've done that, probably a lot of people in your position feel the same way. And that may be a great report that you could write about and discuss during your final project. So through social development, Erik Erikson is one of the leaders in looking at the different stages. He talks about these 8 different stages of social development. His theories, really a lot of theories of psychology, really focus on how we develop through time, with the psychosocial psychology, the psychology of social dilemmas being a big example. So, and what that basically means, a psychosocial dilemma is a conflict between our personal desires, our impulses, and how we fit in the world. So it's who we are and how we fit into this social world, and being able to resolve these conflicts will create more harmony, balance in ourselves and in society. But when you can't reconcile these differences between how the world wants you to be and how you feel, then that's whenever there's going to be a problem, and from personal identity confusion of who are you, why are you here, what is the purpose of life, kind of thing. But here's what the theory really states, and it's important to understand too as you progress and grow through life, that there's a normative amount of psychosocial crisis. In other words, you're going to go, everyone goes, as they go through these different stages we'll talk about, all of us are going to go through these dilemmas, these psychologically social dilemmas that we're faced to look at and explore how they're affecting us, how we fit in. And we're going to often feel like we don't fit in when we probably do. So just realize that these conflicts are normal, they're not abnormal. And you're definitely going to go through these if you haven't already gone probably through a few yourself. So there are 8 different stages you'll see here, 1 to 3 years. We'll talk about each one, 3 to 5, 6 to 12. So these are all different stages in Erickson's, what he talks about, the stage of psychosocial development. And we'll talk about each one. But the important thing also to know that, what's going to happen if you look back at life and let's say you're in the 20 to 34-year-old range, and there's one of those stages that you weren't provided something. Does that mean that your future is set in stone, that this is just how it was? You did not, from birth to 1 year, let's say that your mother did not provide this comfort and all the kind of stuff, and that trust versus mistrust that we'll talk about here in a moment, that wasn't provided. Does that mean that your future is, what it is? And the answer is no. You can definitely regain that. It just means that you need to understand these are if the world is a perfect place and you go from each one of these stages, you have everything you need, then you can become, we talk about self-actualization, another different theory, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but you can become the best version of yourself. So lacking certain things, sorry, I went too fast, lacking certain things doesn't mean that you're stuck or you can't progress. So we look at birth to 1 year, trust versus mistrust. Erickson talked about in this stage, it begins at birth, lasts for a year, and our primary focus as an infant is developing a system of trust with our parent or caregiver, and we start to gain a sense of personal control and independence. So if we have it, if we have if we're fed on time all the time, or when we cry, someone's there, they hold us, they feed us, they change our diaper or whatever, then we're going to trust that someone is there for us. But if someone's not there, if it's not very consistent, that could lead to mistrust later in life. And that's just something from your very first stage. The next stage, 1 to 3 years, autonomy, and that's of course meaning independence. And he calls it versus shame and doubt. If we have it, we are very independent. If we don't have it in the stage, we are going to have shame or doubt in our lives. And toddlers who are encouraged to explore, do things on their own, can develop at a higher level, where some toddlers that are always told, no, they're not allowed to explore, to feel, to touch, to do things, then that can end up leading to a lack of independence and confidence. Or at least that's what Erickson believed at that point. And that all these theories are before computers, before all the different things that we have. So these are theories based on 30, 40 years ago. 3 to 5 years, initiative versus guilt. If a child is placed in an environment where they can explore and make decisions on their own and initiate activities without fear of repercussion, of negative harm, they can achieve initiative. They can feel like that they can actually control what they're doing during the day or whatever. And but on the other hand, if they're not in an environment where they can express themselves or initiate, if it's repressed through criticism, told they're not good or they can't do it, and they're overly controlled, they can have a sense of guilt in their lives if they do anything other than what they're told. So they'll wait around to be told what to do. 6 to 12 years of age, when we talk about industry versus inferiority, and industry basically just means being able to feel productive and confident and productive, whether it's in a work setting or whatever, that we're looking at our own industry, our being is to say we are worthy and we can do great things. But if we don't feel that way, then we're going to feel inferior, discouraged, scared to try new things, or we're going to feel like we're incompetent. We're not as good as other people in that 6 to 12 years of age. Adolescent, 12 to 19, this is when people are really looking at our identity of who we are, and then versus role confusion of not knowing who we are. During that stage, we needed to develop a sense of self and personal identity. Failure to do that can lead, of course, to confusion of who we are, which can lead to sadness, depression, anxiety. And then young adulthood, 20 to 34 years of intimacy versus isolation. And this is where a lot of social media and a lot of research studies are being focused on over the last few years, that intimacy is being able to be vulnerable, to open up and share your thoughts and feelings without any recourse of, feeling bad or less than. So if you don't experience that, or if you have a negative thing, if you're for the first time someone that you really care about and you open up to and tell them some of these vulnerable things about your past, and the result is very negative, then it's going to be hard for you to establish close relationships and intimacy later in life, because you're not going to trust the people for sharing these personal stories or things or experiences that may have happened. And that's usually where therapists make all the money, because then you see a therapist later on and you're forced to do that. And then middle adulthood, 35 to 64, generativity versus stagnation. This is really wanting to make an impact on the world, through life. If you have all those things, trying to, raise children, be your best parent you can, and mentoring others, engaging, you want meaningful work, not just going to a job. And if you don't have that and you feel stagnated and you represent you're stuck or you're not productive, not having that sense of purpose, then that's going to really impact you. And these are all things that lead to sadness and depression, or they can, anxiety. And then late adulthood, 65 and older, this is just looking at integrity versus despair, is looking back at your life or on your life. Do you have big regrets, or did you accomplish great things? Did you make an impact on the world, a positive impact? And that's where people at that age are really, and I think even some of us younger, thinking, what kind of great things did we do? Because that's when you come to the realization that, the most of your life is over. Did you use it the right way? And a lot of people that feel like they want to make a bigger impact, they start to do things in careers, change careers, start teaching, for instance, and hoping that they make an impact with younger people and they can learn from things that they've done in their past. So looking back on social development and infancy and childhood, so there are affectional needs, and those are emotional needs for care, love, positive relationships with others. And talk about the study with Harry Harlow did with rhesus monkeys. Just an important thing to note from that. What he did is he had these monkeys that did not have mothers. They were abandoned. So they took these baby infant monkeys and they created artificial monkeys. And one group that they created are very soft. They're a soft cloth with provided warmth and comfort. And they wanted to see if how they developed versus these other monkeys that were made of like really cold, I think it was like wire. And, they weren't giving the warmth and love, but they were giving the nourishment, milk. And they found that these monkeys preferred the comfort, the love, the support was a greater need than the nourishment. So think about that and the impact of that. So, as an adolescent or as an infant, that need for love, support, comfort is more important than food. That was a pretty big finding, and that's what Harry Harlow's work developed. Kubler-Ross, this is another one where they studied the impact of impending death. When you're told that you have 6 months to live, a year, whatever, you're going to go through these 5 different stages a lot of people hear about. Easy way to remember it is DABDA. But denial at first, to say this can't happen to me, then the anger that it's happened, then bargaining with themselves about why it happened or what they can do, then they may go through some depression, and hopefully that's a short-lived stage where they accept it and they become okay with it if they have enough time. So that's a natural stage. Some people go through it very quickly. Some people just really have a hard time with it and get stuck in a stage, which makes death even harder. So these are 5 different stages of that impending death. And then let's go back to the development with language, cognitive, and morale development. And start with Noam Chomsky, that really talked about it was nativism, which really talked about how, he thought about that our language, ability to speak, was dependent on it wasn't external factors, but said you're basically born with this ability intellectual ability to be able to start developing language, and it is what it is. And, so in contrast, then you have behavioralism. You look at that and you can barely see it, but it says Pavlov and Skinner, these behavioralists, said that no, that really your environment and this external stimuli, the attention, the need for reward, all these kind of things, and the reinforcement has more to do to shape the language development. And of course, why is language development so important? Because that's really a sign of intelligence, and it helps someone start to learn quicker. So being able to have an infant that starts to speak at an earlier age can start learning sooner and has a competitive advantage in life. It's just kind of a fact. So when we look at language development is from this, there's an interactionist social theory that says that language exists for the purpose of just communication and can only be learned in the context of interaction with adults and children. And it stresses the importance of environment and culture that the language is being learned. So you can even think if you're born in Texas, or if you're born in New York, or even Louisiana, not too far from Texas, you can pick up on those accents. You're not born with an accent. You're going to learn that from your environment. And you can tell where someone's from just by the way that they speak. And so there are certain things that they've kind of learned. How can you help a child speak sooner and start developing language earlier? And they talk about, just a quick thing to know, because it may be on the test, motherese or parentese. It's an exaggerated pattern of speaking that's simpler, that uses certain words. You probably hear parents, you just naturally kind of do it. You may call something a boo-boo, or going to the potty, a passy, or a binky, a blanket, or pacifier. You have little things. But what it really talks about in interaction with these children is to help them learn and develop language earlier, is the importance of the social singing and the emphasis on words. So and it's important when you have a baby next to you, is to kind of sing along and talk about what you're doing. We're taking a bath, whatever, making lunch, but it's that they get interested in it, they're going to hear more, and they're more likely to start speaking sooner and learning a lot quicker. So it's just something that you may be interested in knowing. So cognitive development is about processes that contribute to thinking. These cognitive processes, as infants, they're able to think and learn from what they see. They can make predictions, like I mentioned earlier, and even search for explanations on why something happened when they, cried, why this happened or that happened. So you look at the difference between schema and assimilation. Schema is a process of our body of knowledge that we have, our understanding, how we see the world, how we interact with the world, where assimilation is a novel or new information and we take it and we apply it, and once we understand it, we assimilate this new experience, then we apply it to our existing schema. That's basically all it is. So with cognitive development, we talk about Piaget. He was a Swiss psychologist, actually. He talked about children's intelligence, how it undergoes change as the child grows. So he's these different stages. And it's really one used more today than that, combined with Erickson, a couple of different theories. And there's a little change we'll make here in a moment. But these are cognitive developmental theories that are used today. But what Piaget believed was all the children are little tiny scientists that are always experimenting with their environment to gain an understanding. And he thought children are going to do this naturally. You can't not have them do it. They're going to explore, they're going to learn without interaction. But he said that there's distinct developmental stages which children learn language, they memorize things, and they reason. So he has these different stages. And so if you look 0 to 2, he said that they can't create internal representations or mental images yet from 0 to 2, and they're lacking in object permanence. So object permanence just means that, let's say, you say boo and you're with a child and then you disappear, you're gone. So in ages 2 to 7, they don't lack object permanence. So they know that even though they don't see you, you're still there. So that's kind of what that is. And concerned at 0 to 2, concerned with learning to coordinate information. But 2 to 7, it's more egocentric, and egocentric, of course, just thinking about yourself and without regard to feelings or other people, very self-centered, from 2 to 7, but you're thinking about how this affects you. And there's also, theory of mind, understanding that people have different mental states that aren't like yours, that you may think some way, but you may have hurt someone's feelings or whatever. That starts to develop in the pre-operational stage. And then there's a concrete operational stage, 7 to 11 years old, which is emerging ability to carry out mental operations, and then mastery of conservation. That's like that the mass of an object is not going to change in some way. So in other words, if you get water and you pour it in a cup and you see how much water it is, and if you get a bowl and you pour it in the bowl, they actually realize that it's the same amount of water, even though it looks different, even though the containers change. That's kind of what that means. And then there's a formal operations stage, 11 years and up, self-reflective about thought. It's less egocentric with that age. And then we're going to look at an alternative to Piaget. It's Vygotsky's social cultural theory. And that zone of proximal development, that actually describes learning as a social process. That's what you need to remember for Vygotsky's, is a social learning theory. It's a social process, and that's how we form human intelligence, is in our society or culture. So the zone of proximal development is a key construct, and it's defined as like the space between what a learner can do without assistance. So a baby is going to develop certain things naturally, even without a parent. Think of it that way. But if they have a parent and they have adult guidance or someone, that they're going to learn, of course, a lot quicker. So that's the major theme, is that it's a social, your intellectual development is a social process that occurs naturally, but throughout your interactions with other people. So, your interactions, individuals with their speech, the way we talk, and it enables us to organize our thoughts, but also regulate how we regulate the emotion and behavior we learn from other people. So if they're constantly throwing fits, being mad, and you see it and you mimic it, you're going to kind of do the same thing. Or abusing people. That's why abusive parents, usually the children also become abusive parents, unfortunately, until you break that. If you don't want to be like your parents, you have to understand it in a way so you can be different whenever you're in that same situation. So Kohlberg, now we're getting into moral development, the understanding between right and wrong. And Kohlberg really has a theory of moral development, and realized that as children and adolescents develop morality and reasoning, that he says that there's a series of 6 stages, but they're really 3 different phases, and there are 2 stages within each phase. So it's 3 phases, 6 stages, that is focusing on how we develop morally in our environment. And I'll show you those stages. So the 6 stages, and if you look at bottom one, step 1 and step 2, that's level 1. That's the first phase, 3 phases, 6 stages. That in that, younger than 6 years old, your moral development is being punished and being obedient, to try to avoid punishment. You're doing the right thing. So you're developing morally based on punishment and reward type of thing. And then, so there's punishment, step 1, reward, step 2. And then we go into level 2, which conventional level, he calls 7 to 11 years old, that we are developing morally by being a good girl, good boy, about being disapproved, being liked by others, and then of course step 4 is more of, hey, we've got to do what's right and lawful by authorities. And then we get to stage level 3, post-conventional, 11 years and up. The step 5, it talks about conforming to maintain communities, emphasis on individual rights, and the individual principles of consciousness, so our conscious. So that is really those 3 different levels, 6 stages of moral development according to Kohlberg. But there was a problem with Kohlberg too. And here's a couple of stages on it. We've already talked about it. And he had pre-conventional, conventional, post-conventional, and just a couple of different things. Remember, just to remember, pre-conventional, it's guided by punishment and reward. You remember stage one or level one and level two. Conventional is based on following rules, authority, values. And then when you get to post-conventional, the highest level, that's when you're looking on emphasis on justice, dignity, and equality. As post-conventional as what he believed. But then there was Carol. Let's look at this next one, Gilligan. That she believed that theory, just a real quick thing, didn't believe that it really looked at women's concern with the relationship. So where men may look strong, women look weak, and just added a little bit to Kohlberg's theory. It wasn't a big difference, but just know what that difference is if you happen to get a test question on it. So which theorist focused on the impact of sociocultural factors on cognitive development? So think about socioculture. Lev Vygotsky. He was focused on the impact of sociocultural factors, stressing that cognitive development was not universal across all children, but instead depended heavily on the culture and environment in which a child grew. So according to Piaget's theory, the process of modifying existing cognitive structures in response to a new experience and information is called what? Assimilation. So unit 5, psychology and your skill set on ethical behavior. We'll wrap up with this. Human diversity and moral reasoning. When we get into moral values come into focus during adolescence and transition to adulthood, it's a capacity for abstract thinking increases. And abstract thinking, of course, is our cognitive process, allows us to think about what we've observed and what we may have experienced, to start thinking of these concept, ideas, theories, and principles by kind of outside the box to come up with solutions. So although we may not have experienced this ourselves, we're listening to someone else who has, and we can think abstractly about that. And then, of course, talks about human diversity and moral reasoning. It's different with diverse groups and different ideas about morality and ethics. It goes beyond fairness or harm. And it links moral values and cultural groups and religious beliefs. So it talks a little bit also how people establish their own moral compass. Of course, that's our set of beliefs and values that guide us to make decisions from right and wrong, and also give us purpose in life. But then you think about cultural factors for like moral reasoning, like just for decision-making behaviors. Like, for example, in some cultures, they really value about honesty, integrity are highly valued as saying that's the most valued moral compass that you should have. Where in other communities and different cultures, they believe in obedience and authority, that you have to abide by that among everything else. That is what's morally right, is following the rules. So you see the different cultural factors. But then you look at religion and morality, and realize that religion and morality, being moral, they're not synonymous. Doesn't mean that they're the exact same thing. Of course, religion depends on morality, and they even develop religious beliefs alongside of morality, but morality doesn't necessarily depend upon religion. So despite what a lot of people think, that it's an automatic assumption, just because it's believed this is what the religion says, it must be moral. And you think about how religion influences our beliefs and values. You have to think about, well, how does religion talk about social values and views about homosexuality, about women's role in the church or work or in a family, about the nature of good versus evil and family and marriage? They all have strong connections to religiosity, that's all connection to our religious beliefs, religiosity, but they're not always the same. So, challenge yourself to think outside of that, to have abstract reasoning, to think of what is truly right and wrong and moral and just, for when you're talking about morality. So in a behavior also can be legal, but it's still unethical. So like cheating on your spouse, your partner, or that's legal but not ethical. Another thing that's legal, not ethical, how about paying less to a female worker than you pay male workers? Legal, not ethical. Another one you're going to see a lot, and we talk about the, politics and things like that, or companies that advertise, they have a different message to a younger audience versus an older audience on social media. And when it may be legal, but it is not ethical to have two different messages for groups just because you want to appeal to that group because you know what they believe in. And there's also some illegal, but maybe ethical things to consider. And some of those are like helping loved one that maybe has a terminal illness, they're in pain, they're dying, but letting them die with dignity through medications, drugs, or, like you talk about drugs, providing medical marijuana, for instance, for someone that has cancer, taking chemotherapy and other drugs that are causing nausea, pain. And by having medical marijuana, it's illegal in Texas, but is it ethically right? In Texas, it's legal to give all these other crazy painkillers and medications that from pharmacies that have 10 times the consequences, but it's not legal for medical marijuana. So you have to just think about your own beliefs about morals and how that impacts you. So after you've read chapter 3, you listen to this video, there's a lot that we covered in a short period of time. Make sure that you read the chapter in its entirety, take some notes, put it in OneNote, and of course, use this information to help you when you take the next weekly quiz. But thank you for listening, and we will talk to you soon.